Welcome to session 43 of our weekly event series here at School 16. Today's conversation is going to be focused on the role of customer success in big tech. And we have with us Michael Herman, who's a customer success account manager at Microsoft. He has a really interesting story. We love interesting stories. We also love non-traditional stories, people that come from different backgrounds, take different paths into these various roles in tech. The beauty of tech is that, once you're developing these skills, you can transition careers, you can make advancements, lateral moves and the like. Unlike a lot of other industries where you see people kind of follow a very, very particular path. I don't know if there is you see that a lot in tech. People do all sorts of different paths, as you hear from our weekly speakers that we have here. And this is going to be another really, really interesting story. So we're happy to have Michael here with us today. A quick overview of the agenda at School 16 events. They typically go very, very similarly in terms of the structure of these events. We're doing a quick introduction now. We'll wrap up in about a minute. Then we're going to have a quick introduction from Michael as well, just to hear his story in his own words about how he started his career in tech, and then of course in customer success. And then we're going to focus the remaining conversation in how to leverage different opportunities, how to build various skills, how to stand out for these types of roles. Because if you talk to people in these various functions, especially in a client-facing role like customer success, you'll find that they come from all sorts of different backgrounds. Of course, Michael's story is going to be one example. We're going to talk about different stories of folks that he works with as well, just to give people an idea of how you can land these various opportunities. And this is your opportunity to ask questions, right? You're here today for a very specific reason, and we thank you for making this a priority and taking the time to be here at this live session. And so make sure you get out of it as much as you can, which means if you have questions that come up, feel free to drop them into the chat. There's also a Q&A function in Zoom. Quite frankly, we use them interchangeably. So if you have a question, you want to drop it into the Q&A section, that's totally fine as well. But do make sure you drop those questions throughout the chat today as they come up. And of course, we're going to be reminding you later on in the conversation to drop your questions there as well to make sure that we can address them. Very quickly, we did want to mention that we're finalizing recruitment for our Tech Career Acceleration Program that is launching in a couple of weeks on September 20th. It's an 8-week program where we help people advance their careers in tech by developing skills for non-technical roles, and you get to learn directly from experts like the folks that you see on the screen. We already have most of the cohort filled out. But if you're interested and you're looking to advance your skill set and career, please do apply at school16.co/apply. And we have scholarships and flexible payment options and the like. Accessibility is really important for us. So if it's something that might be interesting to you, do check out the program. I'm going to stop sharing the screen right now so that you can just see us here and we can be in the room with you all. And yeah, Michael, we're just going to start off, if you don't mind introducing yourself to the group and giving us maybe like a 5-minute overview of your story to date. Maybe think about it as like if you came to a networking event or something and someone asked you to talk about yourself, how you tell folks about yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure thing. So first and foremost, thank you to the School 16 team. Really appreciate you putting this event together. Obviously right now is a tricky time. Both in tech, as disruptive as it is, and honestly, the job market more broadly, and remote work and just all of it together. So, the more events like this to bring together like-minded people who are interested, I think, the better off everybody is. So thank you. And of course, appreciate all the attendees here from wherever you're from, Connecticut to Istanbul. So I currently am a customer success account manager at Microsoft. I have been in that role for just about 3 years now. Prior to that, I began my career with Microsoft as a consultant in Dynamics 365 is the current product name. At the time, it was Dynamics CRM. So that's Microsoft's customer relationship management software, comparable to certain SAP solutions, certain Salesforce solutions. And I started in that role right after graduating from undergrad, where I studied applied economics at Cornell University. And I focused within that in kind of my later years at Cornell on really what would be decision-making and kind of choice theory. So that relates a bit to behavioral economics. It relates a bit to marketing strategy and communication. and it relates a bit to advertising. So it kind of was all in that general realm around like what makes people make the choices that they make, particularly with respect to economic decision making. So incentives, what opportunities are in front of you, right, versus the costs. So that really created this education around like cost benefit and planning and decision making within that. Now we'll get into this a bit more, but how that relates to CRM consulting and customer success is a bit atypical, I think, which brings us to this conversation. But I've found that the skills kind of that surround that education and what's required in these roles really do have a lot of similarities that allow you to kind of build on those skills over time. So I've been in this customer success role now for about 3 years.
Got it. Let's dig into that a little bit. So you said applied economics. What would you say between your education while you were at school and maybe any internship opportunities that you may have had while you were at school contributed? Because I see here you were a strategy analytics intern as well while you were at school. What do you think contributed most to helping develop your skills so that you were really prepared even after college to provide value to a place like Microsoft right away?
Definitely. I think so. I mean, there's a million ways to look at it. I think that one thing that stands out to me, just top of mind, is I took a managerial economics course, maybe as a sophomore, and we were talking about incentives and the ability to kind of synthesize information that's available to you and then do something with it, right? That then creates value or executes or captures value. And that, while being a very basic principle, frankly, I think really did kind of kickstart both my imagination and my interest about kind of what that means from a customer service and delivery perspective. So what I mean by that is being able to kind of consider all of the different angles of what customers need, or what their decision is factoring in. So if a customer, for example, as just a random example, is looking to develop some solution versus buy the solution, right? Or versus find a partner to contribute to the solution, right? In a customer success environment, ensuring that they do that in the most effective and efficient way for them, that also delivers the value, the business value that they needed to, is really the ultimate goal there. So from my perspective, because of what I studied and the internship experience I had, which, like you mentioned, was in a lot of analytics, honestly, some of it was related to ad sales, which seems a little irrelevant, but it all contributes to this idea of being able to look at disparate sources of information, consider how they relate to one another, synthesize it into some sort of cohesive message or cohesive, just the data itself being a cohesive package, right? Informing then what to do with it, I think is really kind of the fundamental action in the customer success role. So whether the internships were in ad sales, analytics using tools like Google Analytics and the like, or they were a branding project under that same internship, which was at an ad agency, it still kind of leverages that same skill set of being, relatively open-minded and being able to kind of consume different sources of information and understand them in a unique way.
So it sounds like, Michael, you have some really interesting and relevant internship experience. Now, I know this was, maybe like 5 years ago or so, but do you remember when you were early on in the interview process, when you were trying to, figure out how you're going to land your first opportunity and you got this opportunity to interview for Microsoft? Do you remember how you positioned those internship experiences to get them excited about yourself and to make them believe that you're actually going to be productive?
Yeah. So in a way, it kind of resembles like what I was just saying, but just as far as my own story is it goes, right? Almost like being able to kind of take these different sources of information and what those reflected about me and my work ethic and my output, even though they looked like they were kind of disparate sources, being able to loop that together into a narrative, a personal narrative that related to the outcomes, right, is that I've actually done, is first. And then second is relating those outcomes to what the role I'm applying for is asking of me. So in the example you're referring to would be the consulting for CRM, right? So at that point, I'm, I guess, early senior year of undergrad. I'm just thinking about, where to apply. I find this job, I applied for it. And then I'm thinking about how, when I land the interview, how I can kind of go into that. And I started thinking about, okay, like, well, what have been my actual contributions and my output academically and in my internships, right? Now that I've determined what those are, how do those at all relate to what this job's responsibilities require? And while you could say, ad sales analytics is not the same as a CRM system, what they both have in common is some sort of business process, which at the time that was just this nebulous idea, like, oh, like it's a business process, like I'll figure out a way to relate these. And I kind of told the story from the perspective of, okay, I have this different information coming in and this is our end goal. Like, how is what we're ingesting from a data perspective informing what opportunities are available to us, or informing the process that we have, right? Can we tweak our process? And then when it came to CRM system design, it's the thought process rather than the actual construction of the business process that I think for landing a first job was very relevant, because what it did was demonstrate and kind of illustrate a capacity to think in the way that they would benefit from, not necessarily having executed on that activity in the past.
That's really interesting. So it sounds like what they were evaluating on first and foremost is that thinking process, maybe aside from the details. And I'm curious actually, because, in a CRM consulting role, I would think, or at least maybe a lot of other people would also assume like, well, okay, I'm going to be working on Microsoft Dynamics, a very specific type of CRM. Maybe I don't have any experience with it. Was there any trepidation going into the role where you thought, I don't know enough about this to actually make these decisions? And how did you make sure to overcome that gap? Because I think a lot of people will think I need to get certified in X, Y, Z. Obviously, it sounds to me like you learned on the job, but what did you make sure that you did to make sure that you're really effective in your role very quickly? You learn the ins and outs of the systems and the like.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, absolutely, there was trepidation. And I'll say that overcoming that has proven to be an ongoing activity. But when I first started, it's exponential, right? Like, I mean, I had to learn a lot very quickly to be effective, like you said early on, kind of demonstrate my own impact at the organization. Since then, it's a matter of mastery. But in the immediate term, a lot of hands-on work. So in the tech industry, one of the things I think that's very beneficial is the accessibility of the product, services, and tools to learn. It takes 10 minutes to create a Microsoft account plus free trial for Dynamics, right? You can spin that up and start clicking around without any information. And you have probably already done something that 50% of the other candidates didn't do. And it took no effort. Nor did it really even tell me anything, but it at least showed me what the product looked like, such that I could then figure out like why this role was even important and what I would be doing in it, right? So I found a lot of value in being hands-on, and I continue to. I think a second, and okay, so with that also comes certifications. I mean, some organizations require you to get certified. Some of them have, vouchers to get whatever it is, but there was some formal education there, but all related to the actual like system itself. I would kind of add a little footnote here that many organizations, and I will certainly speak for Microsoft, believe that you can and you have the resources to learn about the solutions themselves in a very robust way when you're there. And overcoming kind of the early on trepidation is a lot of soft skills development and kind of quick tech skills. The mastery of it, I think, comes in time. But yeah, the trepidation, I think first and foremost was about the product because I lacked a technical background. So I really did lean into that. And then the second thing was learning about the company strategy and the position of Dynamics as a platform within Microsoft's overall portfolio. That way, beyond kind of the more tactical work, I could speak to, with customers in particular, speak to the value and kind of be able to steer the conversation in a way that related to the rest of, for example, the Microsoft suite. If they were looking to, I don't know, split their data storage between AWS and Google Cloud, but use CRM, like we have a problem, right? And like that's something that isn't, I mean, that's a very obvious example, but that way of thinking, you can't really arrive at without understanding how your specific solution exists within the broader ecosystem.
That's really interesting. And, I like what you brought up earlier, Michael, when you talked about how if you Google something and kind of deep dive into it for 10 minutes, you're already ahead of most of the population. And I would say that applies to a lot of different things. If you spend a whole weekend like learning about cryptocurrency, you've already done more than most people that are just kind of going in and trading blind.
I was going to say already investing. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. And most people just, that's the case, right? There's a little bit of, because it takes work, right? It takes work and concentration to do that. And that's why most people don't do that. And that's a great way to stand out. I want to get back to what you mentioned at the end a little bit later when you talking about other services that could be helpful. I think that's one of the functions of customer success, kind of upselling, cross-selling, whatever it is, obviously. We'll talk about that later. But there's a couple of great questions that came in from Sandra and Aruna. I want to dive into those. I'm going to start with Aruna's question. I'm going to couple it with one of my questions. And that question is how you transitioned from consulting into customer success, and what you did in order to accomplish that. And Aruna's a little bit more specific question is, what was the biggest challenge when you were making that transition?
Sure. So the transition, really what prompted the transition for me, was thinking about what in the consulting role I enjoyed and what I found myself kind of more naturally gravitating towards, both skills wise, and just pure interest. So in the consulting role, it's hands-on delivery, right? I'm traveling to customer sites, I'm helping design, build out the CRM system, what have you. Now, while that is kind of the tactical activity that is like really what I'm solely focused on, if you kind of zoom out a level or two, that's taking place in a broader program that Microsoft is related to this customer through, right? So if the customer is saying, like, oh, we want this CRM system customized in XYZ way, that's typically like so as to modernize our recruiting practices, right? Or so as to modernize our, I don't know, our field service for, mobile engineers, whatever it is, I don't know. So when you think about it that way, like that makes doing the actual CRM design easier because you can kind of understand the process and where it plugs in. But that aside, from a customer success point of view, it really makes you think about like, okay, what are the customers trying to achieve, right? What role does Microsoft play? How do these different projects that we have communicate to each other into a more cohesive program, right? That helps move the customer forward. So I found that very interesting. And I kind of, not being a technical resource, I felt myself kind of at that juncture of like, okay, I can either continue advancing this way and getting more into the CRM system itself, or I can kind of zoom back out and work to position engagements like this and kind of orchestrate the delivery of these things from a customer success point of view. So that was kind of what motivated it. The transition through it, I found really focused in terms of like interviewing and tactically really focused on me communicating that idea of, okay, like in a way, as a consultant, I've already been doing a customer success function. It's just very tactical and viewed differently, right? So it's how does this, what kind of transferable skills are between these two? And the answer is a lot. And the question about what I found to be the biggest challenge, I I think was actually in becoming less tactical, because I now have a tendency to want to fix the problems that come up to me. And I not only can I not always do that, I mean, I'm not an expert in anything besides dynamic CRM as far as products go. Um, that just kind of gets me into the weeds on a few things. It really did early on in that first year. A customer would raise an issue, and I'd be like, oh, like let me check, and I'd start doing research and all these things. But that's not what my responsibility is necessarily beyond like a 100 level. So yeah, kind of reorienting how I relate to the customer was was really the challenge.
So it sounds like you already realized in that initial, consulting role that you enjoyed the customer interaction, that you enjoyed answering those questions for them, helping them figure out how to leverage those products better. You were doing that naturally. I'm curious, I know that sometimes in really large organizations, especially such as Microsoft, when you're gunning for a different role in a company or a completely different department, it's almost like you have to apply just like an external hire would have to apply. How did you navigate it? Was that, I know that you mentioned certifications is something that you did throughout, but how did you navigate that transition to be able to get that job that you wanted?
I think so. Internally, at least, like there's resources that you can leverage internally from like a kind of a casual networking perspective. So I did do some searches on peers who worked in the customer success spaces and the broader services spaces. I also did that based on location. Like I mentioned, I was based in Charlotte very briefly. That was during this consulting practice, and that was for a few years traveling every week. So I knew I wanted to be back in New York. So kind of the internal search, I was able to narrow down based on a few criteria. But I think really more than anything was finding ways to integrate myself into customer success processes before I was applying for the role. And I think that is general career wisdom that I'm not even sure where I got it from, but I stick to it, and it's been very beneficial. This idea of doing something before it's yours. As a consultant, like, I mean, I'm only one step removed from the customer success account manager of any given customer. I mean, it's not that hard to figure out who that person is, or speak to a project manager who's working immediately with you, or a peer, or anybody like that, and just say, like, okay, like, can we talk a bit about how what we're doing here contributes to the broader, customer program? And like, while that might not achieve anything, there might not be an immediate output, that's not necessarily going to equate to a referral or anything like that. What it does is socialize your name and your interest, and it also does give you, I think, it begins to kind of give you the vocabulary of the group that you're trying to join, and that, I think, is critical. If you join an interview setting and you are able to use the vocabulary in some extent of the group that you're interviewing for, you want to blur the line between I'm already doing the job and I want this job as much as possible, I found, and I tried to do that.
I love that. Those two really key things stood out. One is doing the job before you have it, which is huge, because that's going to be the first question you're going to get is, why should you get this opportunity? Well, hey, I already have been doing it. And the second is the networking aspect, even internally in organizations. I mean, obviously a company like Microsoft with so many employees, that's important because you can easily get lost in the shuffle. But even in smaller companies, internal networking is important. And if you're on this call here, and I've been in these situations before, and you're seeing other people are getting promotions or getting opportunities, and you're like, why are they getting those opportunities? It's probably because they expressed interest. It's probably because they asked for it, probably because they inserted themselves in certain meetings, to help out whenever they can. And so they were the right choice, the obvious choice when a time came for that opportunity. So
yeah, let me say, in a large organization, I mean, it's like paramount, because it can feel at times like it's the same as applying from outside of Microsoft, because like you said, there's so many, and there's hundreds of thousands of people. So it's like you're one of all of that, right? So it's not like there's this huge edge necessarily on every job just because you're already there. There really isn't, and even then, you're still internal competition, right? So even adjusting for whatever edge you may feel you have, you all your peers are too. So irrelevant, in a lot of ways.
I think those two things, vocabulary, speaking of vocabulary and internal networking, super critical. The third thing that you mentioned that I think is important is narrowing your focus, whether it's the team, the geography, wherever you want to be. I mean, especially in a massive company like Microsoft. But for those of you that are out there, there's a lot of people that we speak to that just generally want to be in tech or want an opportunity in tech. And that is actually harder when you don't create constraints for yourself because you don't know where to focus. And if you don't have that focus, it's going to be harder to get results. And some of that focus is making sure that you're doing the job before you get it, understanding where those transferable skills fit into this other organization. But it could be anything else, right? Understanding, okay, do I want to be part of a growth stage company? Do I need to be at a big brand company? Do I want to be part of a really small team, like an early stage team where I get to wear many hats? What industry and sector do I want to work in? What customer am I innately motivated to serve, right? All these things are important to note in narrowing down your specific kind of set of things that will make you understand what your next opportunity or next opportunity should look like. So I think that's great.
If I could add on top of that, I think even if you don't have I think that people have an inclination to having a concrete answer to those questions. Like if you were to write down that list of questions that you just said to try and like what is essentially filter down your job search. Like even a rough understanding of those, like, or even narrowing down like, oh, what kind of customer to like 3 industries is like already like extremely useful, because this is again like being tech, it's the kind of a foundational industry for a million other industries, and so many other industries today and businesses within them are trying to, whether or not they have a choice, they're trying to kind of reposition themselves to be a tech company in some extent, right? Whether it's developing, proprietary software or changing their service delivery, whatever, or even their data storage, whatever it is. So there is going to be something tech related everywhere. So any ability to narrow down the search will really make this whole thing a lot more straightforward.
Great, totally agreed. We're going to move to a couple of questions here that we have in the chat. I'm going to ask them in the order that I think it fits kind of the how the conversation is progressing. So I'll go with Layla first. And Layla asked, how much would you say consulting jobs has to do with the other departments in Microsoft, and which departments are those? In other words, when you were in that consulting role, how are you interfacing with other departments cross-functionally and internally, and which ones were those? It sounds like customer success obviously was one of them. What else?
Sure. So, of course, this will be different structurally for every organization, but primarily the way it worked in my experience was that Microsoft has a consulting practice that is, it's not independent per se, but it isn't aligned to any sort of business unit outside of consulting. And now within that, there are different teams for different products. So for example, Dynamics has a team of consultants, right? And then within that, you have CRM versus ERP consultants, or there's security consultants, modern work consultants, right? And then within that, there are people who are subject matter experts on Teams or OneDrive or whatever. So you kind of have your solution-based niche, and then how that relates to the broader business unit. So let's say like I am a Teams expert consulting within the modern work unit, right? But then modern work, of course, is going to have all these other products. It's going to have sales specialists, account executives for all the different teams. It's going to have its product group engineers who work on it. But the consulting piece itself is kind of independent of that. So the way as a consultant you engage with the rest of these is really just as it needs to serve the customer. So I didn't really work with the account executives for any given customer when I was consulting, unless we were having some sort of pivot mid-project or major feature change request, or something that would be impacting the budget, right? Then you would reach out to and engage project management and account executives. If there was some sort of feature request out of box that for whatever reason wasn't working correctly with an existing solution at the customer, and it required the experts of the experts, we would reach out to the product group who works on the Dynamics platform itself. So the interface really is in service of the customer objective at any given time, at least from a consulting point of view. From a customer success lens in my current role, we engage more groups more often. And that's because we are kind of that orchestration hand, making sure that everyone's individual piece is serving kind of the same philosophy or the same vision. So the customer success role, I think, touches each unit more often.
Great, and I think it's a good time to actually dig into customer success and that function. And then Sandra has a really good follow-up question that I'm going to ask after that. But can you talk about a little bit about the day-to-day and how that's different? And then also, if you don't mind touching on what we talked about earlier, which is, the fact that you are in some way in a sales role as well, because I don't know if you have a quota directly as part of your comp, but at the very least you're upselling, crossing on the like. So talk a little bit more about the day-to-day, how it's different, and then how much sales goes into it.
Sure. And let me preface that by saying that you just made me think of this. I feel like people often forget internally to Microsoft too, that Microsoft is a software sales company, right? We are primarily a software sales company. Our money is made selling software, and that is relevant. And that is relevant because our customers often ask for things that are not related to that, or they want us to, make certain custom fixes in the product directly, and all of these other things. Because of the footprint that Microsoft has. And that's very important in the customer success role, because what it does is relate to expectations. And when you ask from the day-to-day, I think we can look at it in two parts. So there's kind of the reactive side of things and the proactive side of things. So on the reactive side, customers will do things like open up cases. They'll say, open up support ticket. They'll say, I'm getting all these emails that aren't spam routed to spam after we implemented Microsoft Defender, or whatever. I'm just making these up, but it's something like that. So what do you do with that, right? There's a lot there, because you need to solve the problem. It has a business impact that customer could be missing important emails that has a financial implication. Who knows? Second, you are giving them software, so it should work. there's that. And then the third is that within that solution, right, it can connect to all these other solutions. And this is where it gets into what you're talking about, which is the kind of cross-selling and upselling opportunities. And now I'll pivot to the proactive half, which would be a customer approaches you and says, okay, we want to make sure that all of these new spam emails we're getting are accurately identified as spam and going to the right folder, right? So then Microsoft can do that in a few ways. We could create custom rules specifically in Outlook itself. You could position the sale of Microsoft Defender as a solution, right? Which will do it in a kind of out of the box, easy to digest way. So what I'm really trying to say here is that when a request comes to you, either directly, or you can identify an opportunity within a different request, right? The only way that you're able to capitalize on that opportunity is by first recognizing that it's an opportunity. So that's where this idea of having a 100 to 200 level understanding of all of the portfolio comes into play on the day-to-day, right? It's necessary to maintain that product knowledge at that 100 to 200 level, which can seem daunting because of how frequently there are updates, there's new releases, there's new competition doing the same thing. So it's a lot to consume. But the fact of the matter is that any real customer request can be satisfied in one of several ways. So knowing either the most optimal way, or knowing how to figure out the most optimal way, or knowing what group of peers to engage to help you figure out the most optimal way. Like, these are the sorts of ways you need to be thinking about things to then be able to arrive at the conclusion that truly does best service the customer's success, right? It doesn't need to be like a hard and fast answer for everything. It's just a matter of how you approach it, I think. So I used the word earlier, and I'll reemphasize it. Orchestration, I think, is what I would describe my role as, because it does touch all of these different groups and require kind of that proactive communication and opportunity identification. And if that leads to a sale, then that's great.
Interesting. So let's touch on that, because that's directly relevant to the question that Sandra asked. Because earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that you have to synthesize this information to the customer, and while obviously understanding their pain, and then at some point maybe present a particular solution to them or an option, which will end up in a sale.
Yeah.
So when you're in this conversation with a customer, can you talk about how you balance, pitching a particular solution, or talking about the value of it, or even just like understanding their problem versus actually going for that sale and getting commitment for them and making sure that they're making that right investment?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I think one thing that I like about customer success roles, I'll say at Microsoft, is that there's kind of an element of like personal approach or style that you can employ here. People handle this job differently because you have a portfolio of your own customers with a small account team. So the way that the relationship between Microsoft and that customer evolves is really just a function of kind of the personal approach and collaboration within that 4 or 5 person account team. So in my personal view, when a customer approaches me typically with an issue rather than something that's truly proactive, especially I'll add these days with the pandemic, customers are really tight on funding. So it's mostly value capture and extraction than it is new sales. We have to kind of walk a fine line, right? You want to solve the problem, and you don't want to do it in a way that will say offends the customer, but more realistically would be like, is kind of, I'd say, kind of shows a lack of understanding or appreciation for the customer's current context, right? So, for example, I'm in the retail and consumer packaged goods industry aligned group. So I only work with customers in those two industries. Having an understanding of the industry trends, position, et cetera, especially during the pandemic, was absolutely critical, because to approach a customer with a potentially really solid list of valid solutions to get them out of a bind that is not respectful of the pandemic or their downsized resourcing or budget, right, is foolish and does not demonstrate good partnership. So I think that what it really is, what it's really been lately, in terms of cross-selling and upselling, has just been really just a function of what the customer's current position is and what they're able to do. And I tend to defer to the customer from that point of view, but always make a point to identify what they will and will not be getting, right? The cost benefit of each decision, and lay them all out. I mean, my personal philosophy in that is like, really it is what it is. I mean, we present complete information. I'm not going to withhold a solution because it has less, less potential profit than another one. Not the least of which because that's unethical, but also because just also because, it does demonstrate poor partnership practically. You don't want to be suggesting things that don't make sense.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting there is because your title essentially is account manager, customer success, typically, and I've been in sales engineering roles in the past, it's very similar dynamic where typically when you're in front of the customer, you actually have a little bit more power usually because you obviously are a product specialist and you know how to talk to, let's say, technical stakeholders, and then necessarily feel like they're being sold to. Whereas if you're an account executive, I mean, that's obviously what you're ultimately going to. So you're in a position of power there. But two things that stood out to me from that response was, one, really intimately understanding the customer and their pain points. It sounds simple, but the fact that you're focusing on this one specific industry, you know, their problems now are different than they were before the pandemic, for example. And so by being narrowly focused on this industry, you are now that empathy exists when you're in that conversation. But then also making sure that you are communicating that ROI, that cost benefit analysis. Like if you were to invest a Y, you know, what would you get in terms of an outcome with Z, or what might be the potential cost that you're not looking at right now? And I think that's important to communicate because ultimately this is tied to numbers.
Right. That also, you know, you said something interesting that just kind of got me thinking too. This idea that, like, you know, their problems now may be different than they were 12 to 18 months ago. That's also true for the expectations and investments that they may have made 12 to 18 months ago, right? They could have purchased a solution from Microsoft with, you know, whatever license and time frame to it that has proven way less valuable because there was a sudden pandemic and they had to let go 80% of their engineering workforce, right? Like now they don't need that tremendous number of Microsoft Teams seats that they just paid for, right? So like that matters. Yeah, so you know, there's just a lot of moving parts and ebbs and flows here.
It sounds to me like, you know, both a consultative sales skill set and product specialist skill set are really important to be good at this job. I'm curious, you know, what else have you seen in terms of the backgrounds that your colleagues at customer success have had, maybe that have come out of Microsoft? What other kind of experiences have they had that make them good at what they're doing now?
Yeah, sure. So customer success roles at Microsoft tend to be filled by people both internal and external to Microsoft, maybe with the same rate. I'm not sure, but it's not something that stands out to me one way or the other. So it really does seem to take as a discipline. It seems to draw from any real background, and the experience and the thought process is the key components there. I think most often, I guess I would say that the trend seems to be somebody with either industry aligned experience, but not customer success experience. So you could have somebody who was in some sort of IT management role at a retail company itself, you know, like a Saks or a whatever. They could be at that company specifically, or it could be somebody who came from a sales background or somebody from an account management or partnership background. So really the roles focused on IT strategy or relationship management. Whether or not, you know, the extent to which those are hands-on and based in the customer versus based in the partner are honestly neither here nor there. I think that the emphasis is really on, you know, the skills and the thought process. Most people who enter this role, I think, tend to be in early to mid career stage as well. It's either a, you know, first, second, maybe third job for most people. I don't see many people coming into my specific role after more than a decade in the industry. Some people take on the role and then they stay in it for a very long time because there's kind of there aren't diminishing returns in that way, because you get to work with the same customers potentially for a very long time, and you know, you can imagine that whatever friction you have can reduce as you build that rapport. So that just happens over time. Yeah.
Interesting, Michael. Folks, we are at about 10 minutes until the end of the hour here, and Michael has a meeting coming up after this. So if you have any final questions, please do drop into the chat. We'll try to address the ones that come in. I'm curious, Michael, from your perspective now, you've obviously been able to develop a lot of these awesome skills and provide a lot of value for the organization. I can see why you've been there for a while. where do you think are there opportunities now for you to improve? Like, do you want to get better at sales? Do you want to get more technical? Where do you see yourself now in terms of developing your skills, and maybe what that can lead to in terms of your next step in your career?
Yeah. So I think the way I look at it now from a customer success point of view is that if you've noticed, I've been speaking about a lot of these fake scenarios from that reactive lens, right? So a customer approaches me with an issue, or there is a world-altering event and we now need to change everything, or whatever. That is from the perspective of something needs to be fixed. And even the idea of rolling out new projects, programs, cross-selling solutions, whatever, I still phrased as like this is part of a remediation activity. But there are a lot of roles that are related to kind of the more forward-thinking approach. So for example, Microsoft has a role, account technology strategist, which may have just changed the title. Don't hold me to it, but you can probably still look up account technology strategist. And what that does, like my role from an orchestration point of view, rather than considering the customer's context and what they want, where they want to go, and then orchestrating the delivery of that, it kind of stops short of the delivery part and is instead like, okay, Microsoft is coming out with these solutions on the roadmap, right? This is where you want to go. This is what you currently have. Here's what our competitors are doing. Here are different ways that the Microsoft stack could accomplish this goal, right? Here are different ways that the Microsoft stack could integrate with AWS, because you said that you're not willing to get rid of the Amazon cloud right now, right? And then maybe down the line that could become, a Microsoft Cloud Azure pitch. But in the near term, this idea of structuring roadmaps, I think, is very interesting, because it requires you to know where Microsoft is headed technically, not just strategically. And often by the time the strategic communications become clear, the technical direction has already been determined and is in development. So I think that the ability to kind of get more engaged from a customer success lens on the forward thinking, and just get less kind of gummed up in the reactive work would be nice. I'm a bit biased. Half the time I've been in this role, there has been a pandemic, which it ripped through so many retail and CPG customers, of course. So, I'm not necessarily surprised I spent a lot of time in that space. But there's a lot of new things on the horizon, and I'd really like to figure out a way to position with my customers, maybe in lieu of or as part of their kind of rebudgeting that they're doing as they exit this tough time.
So would you say then that maybe even because you talk about road mapping, maybe a product management function specifically could work for you in the future?
Yeah, certainly. So product management, Microsoft also has product marketing management, which is interesting too, because that kind of is almost like the between product management and the strategic road mapping. The product marketing is within that, because you're no longer assigned to a particular customer nor a particular specific feature set, but instead as a product category, right? You begin to talk about positioning, communicating, and the ways that can integrate in different customer settings. So yeah, product management, product marketing management are definitely two adjacent areas.
There you go. And a testament to how you can make these transitions once you're in tech. Obviously you have the tech experience, obviously you have the client facing experience, working with a lot of internal stakeholders. Again, natural transferable skills that you can apply to a product management, product marketing role, whatever makes sense for you next. So that's great. We have a few folks asking here that if they can connect with you on LinkedIn, and Michael is kind enough to Thank you, Michael. So we're going to wrap up here, folks, and really appreciate all the insight you provided, Michael. Really cool story. And I think a great way that you have deliberately in many ways have navigated your career to date. I think a lot of awareness that, especially people that start off in tech right out of college, it takes a long time to build, and you're doing a lot of these right steps now. So hopefully for folks that are in the room here, there's a lot of takeaways too. on how to make sure you put the right pieces into place so that you can make these incremental steps in your career. And sometimes it means taking on a particular type of role so you can get that exposure, get that experience in a certain period of time, and then take that story that then you created about yourself and transition that into something else. So I think you've been able to do that really well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for the questions. And also from the whole group here, appreciate the contributions.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you folks too for dropping your questions that were really, really insightful. We're dropping some relevant links here into the chat here, and we're gonna have a few announcements here as we wrap up the session for today. So once again, if you're interested in applying to our program, we're wrapping up enrollment for the September cohort next week, school16.co/apply. Please complete our survey and provide your feedback. These links are in the chat if you want direct access to it now, and we can send you the recording afterwards. Please feel free to follow us on social media, School16Co on Instagram, and just type in @School16 on LinkedIn, and we're listed as a school there, so you can follow us there if you want to hear about upcoming events to make sure you don't miss any. If you're on our email list, you'll get those email reminders as well. And we have an event coming up on, actually that's Wednesday, September 15th, with a head of customer success at LinkedIn. So we're going to be looking at it through a slightly different lens because her experience was very, very different. Her path to customer success was very, very different than Michael's. And that's really also cool to see how different people navigated. I believe she came from a media background. So that's going to be interesting to talk through. So thanks again for everyone that joined today's event. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to see you at another future event soon. And thank you, Michael.
Most definitely. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Cheers.